Hello, everybody, and welcome to our very special event today. I'm Dr. Gurovich. I teach in criminology program here at Hofstra, and today I am pleased and proud to welcome our wonderful panel on the school-to-prison pipeline. Before we start, I would like to thank our Cultural Center and its wonderful staff, Atheline and Carol. Thank you for partnering up with us to bring this panel to fruition. I also want to thank members of the CRC's steering committee, Antonia Codling, Bob Costello, Christian Maziarka, Marcellus Morris, Victoria Roberts, and Demar Tyson, who worked on the organization of this panel tirelessly. So I think it is evident from the interest and from the size of this crowd that the topic of school discipline and criminalization of young people of color is one of the most important problems plaguing our criminal legal system today. While mass incarceration remains the big umbrella problem, at least some of the efforts are made across the country to curb the war on drugs policies. The school-to-prison pipeline is, however, going in the opposite direction. The number of zero-tolerance school policies and efforts to the enforcement are increasing, capturing more and more kids and dragging them into the pipeline. Black and brown and poor children are overrepresented among those whose lives are ruined forever by this far-reaching process of criminalization. So to examine this phenomenon, we have assembled a distinguished panel of experts here, each of whom is asked to apply their distinct expertise and experience in order to move us closer to understanding and hopefully dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline. We will introduce you to our wonderful guests in a moment, but first I would like to ask for a minute of your attention to introduce you to the CRC, Community Reentry Consortium. The CRC is the third leg of this endeavor. The other two are the Cultural Center, as I mentioned, and Criminology Program of the Sociology Department. The idea for this gathering has been conceived by the founding members of the CRC, who played a vital part in organizing it as well. So thank you to the steering committee again. Let me just tell you very briefly about what the Community Reentry Consortium is. It is a network of organizations and individuals here on Long Island who focus on developing resources and solutions for effective integration of returning citizens and support of their families. CRC is a mutual help organization that represents a unique partnership of community activists, academics, and legal and social work practitioners, all coming together to heal, support, educate, and advocate for the community affected by mass incarceration. We are, and I'm a proud member, a brand new organization, and this is our inaugural event. Please check out our flyer if you haven't yet, and our literature table in the back, because it contains literature from our member and partner organizations. And now, to introduce our speakers, I would like to call up my friend and associate, one of the founding members of the CRC, Mr. Marcellus Morris. As a prominent community activist, Mr. Morris is a connector. He wears many hats. He is the CEO of Rain for Life, member of Quest for Democracy, and a board consultant to Outreach Ministries of the National Redemption Project. Please welcome Mr. Marcellus Morris.
Thank you for that applause. The first person I'm gonna introduce, I met because of Victoria Roberts, and she introduced me to her story, and I got a chance to do a her story piece. And through that process at Stony Brook University, I was able to meet, and she reached out to him and made sure that he was here for this panel. Honorable Fernando Camacho, 10th Judicial District, Suffolk County, New York State Court of Claims, and acting Supreme Court Justice. Mr. Camacho. Although I tried to wave to this young lady earlier, but she didn't know who I was, but I guess she knows now. Dr. Monique Griffin. Assistant Professor for the Department of Psychology, Hofstra University. I had the pleasure of listening to this young man speak maybe about 6 months ago, and I came up to him after after his speaking on the panel, and he was enlightening me. He can spark the conversation, but mostly he's a detail-oriented person and really took this topic under discussion. Dr. Jonathan Lightfoot, Professor and Director of Center for Race, Culture, and Social Justice, Hofstra University. This other young man, he has an amazing story. I really don't have to speak for him because after y'all hear him speak, y'all gonna realize who he is and what he does. The one thing that I like to pinpoint about him is that I'm horrific when it goes to sending out emails, and very few people have the courage to tell me, bro, you got to get your stuff together because this could go to the President of the United States or something. But he's a dynamic speaker. I respect him. We had a conversation about the school to prison pipeline, and just like me, he chose not to go to school and put his effort into school. And if you could, once you hear him speak, you'll realize that if he wouldn't have, just like me, if I wouldn't have wasted my time taking the wrong path, we would have been CEOs, organizers, and we wouldn't have been in this type of position. We're in good positions now, but we went through years of pain to get here because he said that he was in honors class and he came down just to be with his friends. And I did the same thing in the 8th grade. I didn't want to be in a higher class because none of my friends was in there. I didn't feel comfortable in there. I wanted to be in a lower class. So that almost starts the school to prison pipeline. Prince Dennis Mapp. This next person, I was trying to be careful because I thought she still worked for the ADA's office, but I didn't know that she had moved, and now she just works for probation. So that's a whole different light. So now we can have some real conversations. But she's one of the people that people have good hearts, and people are good people. But when you find a good-hearted person that just really cares about the community and cares about the people, that's a whole different person. Miss Raya. The last one. He used to be a dean at Uniondale High School, and I went to the school one time, and he touched my heart just by having a picture of me and some of my comrades inside his office, because we used to go in and speak. He has passion, just like Ms. Ryan, just like the whole panel, for this population. He teaches at the ABJS Middle School now, and his goal is to not have individuals come to prison and how to keep them out. Because we can pinpoint who's going to prison. By the time they reach from 6th to 8th grade, you can almost pinpoint who's going to prison. I heard this, I didn't take it under study, and I didn't do no observation or none of that, but just my life, when they say come speak to somebody that's on the wrong path, and then I see that person 10 years later and they on the wrong path, including my son, I realize that we have to start lower. We have to start lower. So that's where the Community Reentry Consortium comes into play. If we can all come together for that common cause. Right now, I'm going to introduce one of my comrades. I would like to maybe 5 seconds of silence for the person that brought us together, and that's Gary Pryboy. Gary Pryboy was running a program inside Nassau County Jail. Tyson was a part of that program. When Tyson was coming home, Gary Pryboy said, "You need to meet Marcellus Morris." And me and him met, and we clicked ever since. We've been doing this now for maybe 11 years. And I would be remiss if I wouldn't call out Mr. Castillo. He's part of the reason that we got here. We've been speaking at his class for 6 or 7 years. We have developed a relationship with him, and we continue to speak in the class. DeMar Tyson, he's your host for today. Can you please come up? One more thing I want to say, one more person I want to shout out. I'm sorry. I said I wasn't going to talk long. In the back, you have a young lady named Miss Lukes, who's teaching individuals inside the community, inside of probation, and inside of different spaces, financial literacy, but also mindset development. So she had an intern last year that was working with her. So after this, please, students, organizations, please sign up on the list if you want to help or if you want to talk to this population or you have any questions afterwards, how you can help. Please sign it back. DeMar, take it over.
Good evening. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Welcome. I didn't anticipate Marcellus mentioning Gary Pryboy. That took me through a 30-second emotional loop, and I need to be cool, calm, and collected to do my thing up here. But Gary Pryboy was a magnificent man who introduced Marcellus and I met Gary Pryboy during my last term of incarceration. I wasn't really going to speak about my terms of incarceration because it's really not about my journey, but being that he brought it up, I'll just touch very briefly on it, if you will. I did about 5,840 days incarcerated. So that comes to about 16 years of incarceration. Without going into the details of my first, second, and third incarcerations, I'll go right to the last one where I met Gary Pryboy, and at this point in my life, I had enough. And so he was running the DART program. The DART program was an alternative to violence or somewhat of an in-house rehabilitation program, not widespread throughout Nassau County. This was only 1 or 2 dorms. In this dorm, I was able to focus on inner transformation, have camaraderie with other men who were looking for a change. And in this place, I saw an outside guest come in. And I saw this guy from my neighborhood, and I'm sitting in the dorm, and I'm like, I know this guy. How you get in here? You know, and after the class, after he spoke, I went up and I spoke with him, and we exchanged some niceties. And from that point on, that was one of the pivotal moments in my life where I began to want to change and give back to the community. And so that's just a little bit of how I eventually got to this picture right here. So Gary Pryboy introduced me to Marcellus, and when I got hooked up with Marcellus, I've been doing community reentry work ever since, and that was about, I don't even know, 10 years ago. So tonight, I welcome you. Thank you to the staff, the Cultural Center, Leanne, Bob, all our distinguished guests for coming together and speaking about a topic that many times people, for some reason or another, try to say that perhaps maybe it doesn't exist, or how can it exist in 2023? But tonight we have some very distinguished guests who bring different levels of knowledge and expertise, and most importantly, they bring courage. The courage to speak about something that not only affect our communities, but communities throughout the United States. And so tonight, we're going to have a panel discussion on the school to prison pipeline. So you already heard the introductions. So without further ado, we're going to begin. We're going to be having, our first theme will be about establishing the problem. We all know the problem is a school to prison pipeline. So we'll begin with, based on your knowledge and experience, how would you, in your own words and experience, define the school to prison pipeline? And so what we mean by that is some historical problems, some policies that may contribute to the problems, type of peoples and communities that are affected by these issues. And so our first question is going to be directed to Mr. Saunders.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
The historical problem for me goes back to when I was a teenager growing up in the crack era, and it became the mandatory drug sentencing. And watching my peers who came from two-parent households, who were on their way to being athletes and other things within the community, got caught up in this trick bag called making money and profiting illegally. So watching my peers consistently go through the revolving door of prison and probation inspired me to go into education. And that means I grew up in the community of Roosevelt. I've been an educator on Long Island, from Roosevelt, Hempstead, Uniondale, as well as Malvern. So I watched the trajectory of the community shift from people who were focused on education, students focused on education, to shift to money. And within that structure, when you look at the school system, a lot of our young people in the early days had to raise themselves because the parents were addicted to the substances or underemployed. Now, a lot of them are doing it because it's a choice. In the beginning, it was, I have to do something to contribute because I'm helping mom and dad pay the mortgage or the rent. Now it's shifted to, I want to do it because it's cool. My mission for the last 30 years is to change the mindset through history and culture, working with our young people, establishing programs, bringing in guest speakers, exposing them to things outside of the community. And that's been my passion for the last 30 years, in Suffolk County as well in Nassau, because I work in both counties consistently, because I'm tirelessly working to change the mindset of our young people by exposing them to different things. So I don't want to take up too much time.
Very good. Thank you very much. Next up would be Mr. Mapp. That same question to you, sir.
So, I've only been able to be a part of the solution for about 8 years. 18 years of my life I spent in prison, and it was due to the problem, which is historical trauma. Some of the things I faced as a child growing up, as a young person growing up, household with drugs. My father overdosed on heroin on Father's Day, abuse, being wrongly accused of a crime. Like Marcellus was saying, I was very smart. And I was in top classes, but all my friends was in special ed. And they was having all the fun. And I wanted to join them. And I did everything I could to join them. If I had an A on my test, I would fold it and tell them I got an F. And they would give me high fives. So I'd rather get high fives than pushed on my back for doing well in school. And there's a thing I talk about this dash. And your dash is that line in the middle between the year you was born and the year you're no longer here. And that my dash is filled with trauma. And my dash had been defined by the system. And I only have about a quarter left of that dash. My dash is almost gone. And I only have about a quarter left. And I'm defining my own dash now because I allowed the system to define the beginning part of my dash, which led me from school, special ed, thinking about my GED at 12, right? Like why would a kid at 13 years old start thinking about a GED? Thinking about the fastest way to get out of school because you'll be hungry on your way to school. The fastest way to get out of school because you don't have the same clothes on that some kid that's doing better than you, not exceptionally better than you, but a little bit better than you. So wanting to keep up with the Joneses, so how about not going to school? And those were my thoughts at a very young age. So I stopped going to school. And my next stop and my final stop was prison. And that was all because of a system that was designed from the beginning for me to fail. Removing the father from the household. There was a time most people, I'm going to show my age now, they had something called face-to-face where you had to go sit in front of the social services and talk to them about getting your food stamps and stuff. So my moms would go to face-to-face and get us the food stamps, but when they came to visit the house, she told our stepfather at the time that he had to leave because no man could be in the house. So now if you constantly having the man leave the house so face-to-face could come and give you food stamps, after a while, guess who ain't coming back? Anybody know? The dad, right? The dad's not coming back, and that's also by design. So, and you know, now that I'm older and I did my time, I got my education in prison, I got my degrees in prison, I'm not going to blame the system because I have to define my own dash, right? But why did it take me to go to prison? Why did it take me to go to prison to get my education to learn how to define my dash?
Good, thank you. Ariane, would you care to touch on that as well?
I think an important part of what all of us are here to discuss and why it's so important that all of us are here is the lack of collaboration between the educational system and the justice system. I feel like everybody wants to stay in their own box and do their own thing, and they focus on the task at hand, and the task at hand may not be in the best interest of the young people that we're trying to serve. So if the educational services or the schools are defining the task at hand as keeping a safe school environment, then they're not necessarily looking at the educational needs or the trauma or the background of the young people that they're serving. They're not necessarily taking into account the population that they're serving, the special education needs of the people that they're serving. They're really staying very defined within their box. And the highlight of all of that are things called the zero tolerance policies. So when you look at the education system and they're saying, okay, we have zero tolerance for marijuana in school, or we have zero tolerance for fighting, and our solution to that is not educating our students, which is what the school systems are intended to do. Our purpose is then to keep the school safe and remove anything that is outside of our box. So zero tolerance in schools has really led to a huge increase in keeping kids out of the schools. And then the other side of it, the side that I work in, is the justice side. So if the justice side isn't working hand in hand with the school side to make sure that those young people who are forced out of the schools are given appropriate services on the prevention end, right? There shouldn't be that direct link from school suspension to arrest to court. There should be some intermediary in the way that is a diversion, that is a way to avoid the stigma of the justice system. But because so much of the justice system is routed in, what the usual trajectory of a court case is. When someone comes in, they're arraigned, and then they go right through, the court process and the trial, you miss those opportunities to really interject, to really educate, to really address the trauma. So I think the lack of collaboration between the two systems is a huge factor as well.
Good, thank you very much. Dr. Griffin.
Yes, I would echo everything that has been said, but there definitely is a term that has been said by multiple individuals, and that's system, right? Even if we move beyond and we think back a little farther, before the war on drugs, we're talking about a larger systemic issue, right? Which starts with bias in the larger system, right? And the school system is a system within that larger system, which is influenced by federal laws, right? Local laws. It's a system among many. And so if there's bias among and within that larger system, it's filtering into the school system, right? So that larger systemic issue is what is actually sustaining the issue that we're talking about, which is the funneling of children in schools from either special education or children and students who've experienced trauma, but based on their behavior, they're being funneled through punishment and using the vehicle of punishment into the juvenile justice or the criminal justice system. So it is a systemic issue. So we can look at the schools and we can try to implement programs to address what's happening in the schools, but we can't do that without recognizing that it's a larger systemic issue.
Good, thank you very much. Judge, please.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to address this from the court system's perspective, not the school systems, court systems. And I want to put two images in your head. Think about this. I've been in the court system for 40 years. 27 years ago, I was a judge in Brooklyn, brand new judge, sitting in a huge courtroom in Brooklyn, criminal court. Case is called. 16-year-old comes out from the back in handcuffs. Woman stands up in the middle, starts yelling. Court officers start rushing toward her. Stop, leave her alone, let her speak. She said to me, Judge, please help me. I'm going to lose my child to the system. That had incredible impact on me. Since that day, every jurisdiction I've been a judge in, I have started an alternative to incarceration program for young people. Started in Brooklyn, Queens for 11 years, and then here in Suffolk County for the last 10. And that is the image that I keep in my head. Judge, please help me. I'm going to lose my son to the system. Second image I want you to think about. Close your eyes. Queens County. I have my youth part, young people in the audience, in probation, waiting for the cases to be called. A gentleman comes out from the back, 60-something years old. I'm looking at his rap sheet, and I say, Sir, I'm just doing the math. You spent 3/4 of your adult life in state prison. He said, yeah, Judge, isn't that sad? That is so sad. Sir, do you mind talking to the young people in my courtroom today? And he said, yeah. We turned around. I said, officers, let him go. We turned around and talked to him. He said, I caught my first felony when I was 16. We're just running around, nothing to do. So we liked that jacket, so we stole it. He gave me 2 years. I came back, wasn't going back to school, had felony convictions, couldn't get a job. So I offended again, went back. This time I was a predicate, so they doubled it. And then after that, every time I came out, what am I going to do? This is all I know. Next thing I know, he said, I have spent most of my life, young people, in state prison. What a tragedy, where 30-some plus years of my life I spent in a little cell looking out bars through a small window. And in terms of establishing the problem, I want to bring one other thing to your attention, and I think is really important. One more image. And it is the impact that the prison pipeline has on entire communities. It demoralizes communities. When communities see their young people, one after the other, going up to state prison, it demoralizes them. It sort of makes it, for the younger people, a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's going to be me. It's self-defeating. So the effect, a larger impact, not only in the incarcerated, but on entire communities, is just tragic. It demoralizes an entire community.
Thank you, Judge. I appreciate that. Lightfoot,
Yes, sir.
how you feeling tonight?
Oh, you got me fired up now. Let me get closer to this mic here. I'm hearing my co-panelists talk, and I'm changing what I want to say each time somebody talks. But I want to piggyback off of what Dr. Griffith said about bias and systemic bias. I think it goes beyond bias, and it's outright racism. It's structural racism. And we live in a country that was founded on the genocide of indigenous people and the enslavement of African people. It's baked in the cake. It's woven in the fabric. And there are no institutions in America that are not permeated and affected and impacted by this structural racism. It's all by design. Anti-black racism in particular is by design. And there's a hierarchical structure that allows for appearance, skin color, facial features, hair texture, where privileges and benefits are distributed, institutionally through our country. And schools being the greatest socializing institution because of compulsory education, everybody has to go to school. So if you're going to have some kind of pervasive influence like your school system, and you want to oppress a people and determine by their so-called race, their class standing, their gender, whatever it is, their identifying markers, you do it through the schools. I taught school in South Central LA. It was pretty rough out there. I taught school in Chicago, pretty rough out there. Taught school in Massachusetts at the K-12 level. And I think one of the biggest things that sent me back to school, because I did this after my bachelor's degree, but the biggest thing that sent me back to school was the issue of discipline in the school system. And knowing that these students that I was teaching were being suspended, because I was teaching primarily BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color students, being suspended at higher rates, being expelled from school, subject to harsher discipline, being overly referred to special education. I did not want to limit myself to just the class that I was teaching. I want to teach the teacher. And so that's why I went back and got my doctorate degree, so that I can have a greater impact and teach the teachers, to make sure that those teachers would go out into those schools and carry the message that I would convey to them about their cultural sensitivity and their ability to interrogate their biases and reflect on their racism, sexism, their classism, and so forth, all of the isms that they may be subject to, ableism, to make sure that we try to change, working still within the system, because I'm still within the system, and knowing that this system by design, with this war on drugs, which was a racist system in and of itself. It was by design. And I found that me being a professor of social and cultural foundations of education, my job is to make these critical connections between school and society. So what's happening in society, I want to know how that impacts schools. So if we have a mass incarceration happening before our eyes, and I want to bring that into the classroom. If we have a so-called war on drugs happening in our society, I want to bring that into the classroom. I want my students who are preparing to be teachers and school leaders, principals, superintendents, and what have you, I want them to know that they don't just teach math. They teach students math. They don't just teach social studies. They teach students social studies, and to make sure that they center the child, center the students. And just let me share with you about this war on drugs, and I'm going to get back to some other stuff later. But I came up in the 60s watching the civil rights movement unfold on television. I was in the North. I was in Chicago. But I watched Martin Luther King. I watched Malcolm X, go before the mic and, talk about white devils and, talk about the system and by any means necessary and so forth, and all the I Have a Dreams and all that stuff from them. And that had an impact on me, watching the Black Panthers, watching Angela Davis, and false charges being brought, these political prisoners coming into the system and having to fight, trumped up charges, excuse the pun. But it was an awful thing. And so it was later on in COINTELPRO when they were having informers. Anybody watched that movie Judas and the Priest, I believe Black it was? Messiah. Yeah, Judas and the Black Messiah. Yeah, they all this stuff is happening, and they're doing it on purpose. So with that, I just want to say this here in 1994, this is like 20 years later, and 25, 30 years later than all of this, what was going on in the civil rights movement. But in a 1994 interview, President Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Ehrlichman, you might have heard of him, provided inside information suggesting that the war on drugs campaign had ulterior motives, which mainly involved helping Nixon to keep his job because he was in trouble. And this is at the time when Watergate had already happened. So in this interview, you're talking about 20 years later, the journalist Dan Baum, publisher of Harper Magazine, said that the Nixon campaign had two enemies, the anti-war left, the Vietnam people who were against the war, the hippies and what have you, and black people. His comments led many to question Nixon's intentions in advocating for drug reform and whether racism played a role. Ehrlichman was quoted as saying, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or to be black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We would arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Hell yeah, they did." I'm gonna stop right there.
Okay, let's give a clap for that because he got a clap. Right? All right, so again, I'm sorry, I'm the host for this evening, so I'm tasked with a difficult job sometimes to, get to the heart of the matter. This is a college university, a very prestigious one as well. So what happens is, as much as this is an illustrious panel of great minds coming together to dispense knowledge to the public, I want to ask, we need, before we move on to the next question, could somebody volunteer to just give me, to be Google for me, right? So if we was to Google what is the school to prison pipeline, right, what would the definition look like, right? What would the definition in its simplest terms so that the students, our future leaders, prosecutors, probation, parole, counselors, the people that we're passing the torch to, right? The people that we're here presenting our knowledge and experience to, so that we believe that at some point in their lives, they can be the disruptors of the school to prison pipeline. That's what we're here for, right? We're not really here to just gloss over the subject matter. It was a great panel. You guys did a wonderful job. We're here to roll our sleeves up and actually get busy, and not saying that you're not, but I'm just reiterating that we want to give them something to take away so that they can add on and expound and remember. So who's going to volunteer to be Google? We got three.
Yeah.
All right, so before we move on, so we're going to begin with Mr. Mapp, Dr. Griffin, and Mr. Sanders.
So I wrote this before I.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. So the question, just for me to reiterate, how would you define the school to prison pipeline?
So the school to prison pipeline is a systemic and disturbing phenomenon in the American educational system, right? It has parallels in other countries as well, but we're talking about here. The pipeline represents a set of policies, principles, and practices and conditions, which is there's a term called social constructs, which is a group of ideas made by men, right? That actually molds the world, not just the country, but the social constructs are a group of ideas made by men. And so it disproportionately pushed students, particularly those of color, into marginalized communities, and eventually into the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. So Mr. Lightfoot, Professor Lightfoot, when you just, and I'm a sucker because I start crying real fast, but you just described, because my father went to Vietnam. My father got a heroin addiction in Vietnam. Mm. My father came back and overdosed on heroin. Remember, blacks, hippies, weed, blacks, heroin. Mm-hmm. Prince, prison. Father, dead. Right? So, in a nutshell, in 3 lines, he just described my life. Mm-hmm. In 5 lines, I just gave you my definition of the school to prison pipeline.
Thank you. Google will be looking for you. Dr. Griffith.
My definition would be similar. It's basically a pattern of pushing students out of the traditional mainstream academic system using punitive and exclusionary practices. So it's a funneling that happens, right? Where students are pushed out using the punishment, right? It could be suspensions, expulsions, different practices. And that's one of the reasons why, consistent with Dr. Lightfoot, I mentioned bias, right? Because what you see is conditioned by what you believe, right? And so if there's bias, there are going to be certain individuals that are being funneled and handled differently. And they happen to be students of color or associated with marginalized groups.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Saunders.
I would define it as a capitalistic way of using free labor, a math equation, plus time equals profit. A lot of the institutions or prisons are profit-based. So when you have free labor, which is an extension of slavery, when you look at the 13th Amendment, which is part of your Constitution, it indicates that you are free, but you could be in servitude. Servitude is an extension of slavery, is legal slavery. So how do you keep that profit coming? Think about those who've been incarcerated. Look at the locations of the prisons in which you've served. They're in predominantly Caucasian areas that is the main source of income for that community. So you need the bodies to produce the labor to produce the products to be sold, for you to make 50 cents an hour, whatever they pay you locked up. It's a system of capitalism that's been there since the beginning. People need to be aware of the fact it's about money. Black bodies, lack of education equals money. When you look at what Malcolm X used to talk about, when you come from a poor school, you have a poor community, you have no jobs, it's a systematic approach to get you incarcerated because you have to survive. You're going to do whatever's necessary legally or illegally to survive. So when you look at, from that perspective of capitalism, how do we disrupt it? We disrupt it by providing the necessary resources and time and energy. One big problem that we have, one of the panelists mentioned it earlier, is regarding the lack of fathers that are relevant due to the systematic. If you look at the system in the early days of welfare, you couldn't get welfare if the male was in the home. It's systematic. It's designed to remove the man from the home. We have a daddy problem now. Daddy's not what daddy used to be. So we need the men to step up and be men. Even if you're not in the home, be present. Nowadays, everybody has a phone. You can FaceTime your kid. You can call your kid, you can email your kid. It's about being present in the lives of your children. And that's the only way that the disruption is going to have. So my definition is free labor plus time equals profit.
Excuse me, Tyson, I just want to make one correction. Prison labor is 11 cents. And if you have your GED, you can get 25 cents. And if you have a college degree, you might make 45 cents, but that's only 2 spots in jail. So the average person starts off at 11 cents. So I just wanted to just correct.
I stand corrected.
The numbers there. I was making 25 cents an hour for a long time.
And if you work in one of the key prison jobs, you might make 50 cents.
You might, but you got to have a GED at minimum.
Yeah, and you know, some skill. And they
you got to have a
with
skill.
50 cents.
Yeah, 40. It's 45.
45.
Yeah, and they're not going to 50 yet.
And the product that you make is sold for maximum profit.
Millions.
They actually produce a pamphlet inside the correctional institution in New York State that maps out how much money Corecraft, which is an institutional company, how much they made for the year. You know that booklet they give out? And they show you, itemized, that they make millions of dollars off of your prison labor. Mm-hmm. So my next question was going to be, real quick before we go into our other official next question, because we hear a constant theme that they profit off of prison labor. In 2023, is this real? I mean, are they really making money off of prisoners? And is this not just some phenomenon that's going on social media by the somewhat conscious community? Is prison for profit real?
Yeah.
Yes, it's very real.
I think you just heard a little bit of it, right? I think
Yes.
that
I just wanted to reiterate. I wanted to put it back out there.
It's very real.
It's absolutely real. It's part of the system. It's part of how the system profits within itself, and the irony of the lack of pay and then the increase in pay for education rang very true to me, because here we are talking about the value of education and how the lack of education is a direct funnel into the prison system. And then on the other hand, we're hearing that if you have an education or you get your education while you're in prison, you're going to benefit from that. So they're kind of playing it on both ends, that we aren't going to give you the benefits that you should be surrounded by. We aren't going to give you the supports while you're in school so that you can get the education, so you can get your GED, your college degree, whatever it is. But on the other hand, we're going to value that once you're in the prison system. So the irony exists, absolutely, and the fact that the community as a whole is benefiting for someone who's making a product for, at max 45, 50 cents an hour that's being sold, all over for thousands and thousands of dollars.
And you go to jail in jail. Did you know that you can go to jail inside jail? So if you don't wake up and go to program and go to work for that 45 cents, you can go to jail, meaning that you can go to solitary confinement. So you get punished for not working for those wages as well. So I did 700 some days in solitary confinement, meaning like 23 hours locked in and 1 hour in a cage where you can get some sunlight. But if you do not go to program, what they call programs, you do not go to work, you go to jail inside jail.
And this is why a lot of people consider it modern day slavery.
And you only get sunlight if your cell is facing the sun when they let you out of your cell during that time of day. I did 285 days in solitary confinement. So if your side of the prison comes out after 12 o'clock, when you get outside, it's going to be snow on the ground. And so how long you want to stay inside a dog kennel full of snow? You want to get back into your cage so it's sick. Right, so that leaves us. I see you, Lightfoot. I see you. I see you. I think I'm gonna hit you first. Okay. All right, let's get it.
Am I tagging on this or what?
You're gonna.
Y'all talking about formulas and whatnot, you know.
We're gonna get deep into the formula as we go on because this next. But I'm just sorry, sir. Okay. This next question is in fact about formulas.
Okay.
All right. Now let me just ask you a question, right? Should you go first or should you go last? No answer to that question. All right, so Dr. Lightfoot, my next question is, right, what are, and we may have touched on it indirectly in our other answer of the first question, but what are the specific, if we can quantify it, causes of the school to prison pipeline? How can we begin to make it make sense so we can identify it when we see it?
Well, you want me to go first, you said, on that question?
I mean...
That's directed to me.
Yes, it is, sir.
Okay, all right, yeah. We want to look for signs.
No, the question, I'm sorry. What are the causes of the school to prison pipeline?
Yeah, well, the causes is racism, anti-black racism, anti-brown racism. You know, you've been identified, you know, as a group that, you know, the powers that be said that there's not a place for you in larger society, and that your education is not going to be valued. Your body, your mind is not going to be valued. So you get the kind of education that prepares you for service and for servitude, and not for leadership. So. My brother here talked about the self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you're not valued, you're marginalized, you're part of an oppressed group, historically so. You know, we live in a country where, you know, our system of being an heir, being passed, estates being passed on to children and to grandchildren. If your grandparents didn't have anything to pass on to you, so that you don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to start over every generation. It becomes a problem. So in schools, even pre-Brown, 1954 Brown v. Board of Education, when the Supreme Court unanimously, probably the last time I think something was unanimous compared to this Supreme Court, decided that, you know, segregation was inherently unequal. So it became now legal, whereas it was against the law for black kids to go to school with white kids, brown kids go to school with white kids. And this is when this research has been documented, that this is when we found discipline to be a problem in the schools. You know, when black teachers, black principals, black parents were a part of the schools, and even though it was segregated, there's research that say we lost a lot. We fought for integration, and some people question whether, you know, that was something that, you know, we have benefited from, because it looks like we've suffered from it, because that's when we started getting suspended. That's when we started getting referrals for special ed. That's when we started to get expelled from school and become a problem. Where all of a sudden learning, my brother here saying that, you know, he hid that he got an A, you know, that it's all right to dumb down and say, you know, to acting like you're white if you're, you know, interested in academic achievement. Those are the things that have led to the school to prison pipeline. And this is a modern day invention. So I would recommend that everybody watch that movie 13th. And I also would recommend that's about the 13th Amendment, by the way. It's better to know that. And read the book, The New Jim Crow, by Michelle Alexander. You know, when she talks about mass incarceration in the age of color blindness, spells it out that when the Civil War ended and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were passed, then that amendment passed because they left a loophole in it. And that loophole was convict leasing. So you're free, and I use air quotes liberally. You're free so long as you don't commit a crime. And so if they can find a way to charge you with a crime because they need your labor, they will do that. Okay? And education be damned. They weren't trying to teach you nothing. They were trying to use your body for your labor. And can I introduce my formula? Profit over principle equals prostitute. They've been prostituting us, since we got here, since 1619. But for sure, legally so after the Civil War ended and the 13th Amendment was passed.
Thank you. Next, Judge Camacho.
Sure. I just wrote down my Google definition real quick for the court system, and it makes sense, may not. I just wrote it quickly, but this is what it is. And then I'll follow up on what I think some of the other issues are. I think that in the court system, at least, it is the lack of compassion in our court system where we hold the most marginalized and discriminated against individuals to a higher standard of conduct in our criminal justice system. And I think the simplest way to look at it is this. In the court system, everybody has a docket number. You're D17325 of 23. And if we're not careful, we look at these individuals as numbers. And I often watch other judges on the bench, and I'm not saying that people do this intentionally, especially with heavy dockets. Do they even look up from the papers? I make a point. The minute someone stands before me, the first thing I do is look them in the eye. Hello, how you doing today? And then I'll read the papers. So I think what we're missing in the court system is if we only listened to the stories. That's what I do all day. I listen to these stories of these children, and I am moved. I'm compelled to take action. So our court system needs to find a way where we force all the partners in our court system to look beyond the number and look at the person and listen to them and listen to their story. And then we'll be more compassionate and we'll be fairer. We'll be more just. And the final thing I want to talk about, because it's often overlooked, and I'm sorry it is, it's one of my thing I'm most disturbed about in our court system, is how we treat mentally ill individuals. We don't care. We don't provide resources in our communities for the mentally ill, even for mentally ill children. And then once they become court involved, we treat them like they're not a human being. We put them in spit masks and shackles and solitary confinement, and we make believe they don't exist. Shame on us. And I want you to think about something. A young man, 15 years old, came before me about 8 years ago here in Suffolk County. He was performing a serious felony. First time he comes out in a spit mask, this huge, ugly-looking mask and shackles. And I'm saying, officer, he's dangerous. He's dangerous. He's dangerous, Judge. You can't. I'm not going to have him in this courtroom looking like with that on, please. And then you could barely hear him. But he said it once. What did you say, Josh? What'd you say? He goes, Judge, I am tired of being treated like a mad dog. That, sadly, our lack of compassion for the mentally ill is part of the prison pipeline.
Thank you, Judge. I appreciate that. And for our guests, we must keep in mind, right? Again, we are the future decision makers, policy makers, judges, lawyers, etc. Just remember that this is a judge, and the display of compassion needs to be kept in mind, because when you're in that position to administer justice to someone, you have a frame of reference from which to draw upon so that you can make the best decision that you can make involving the fate of another person's life. Make sense? Mm-hmm. All right, so next up, I'm sorry, help me out, Mr. Saunders. Help me out. Who wanted next?
We still talking about the same question?
Yes, Mr. Mapp.
So,
Right. Okay. We're still into the answers.
I was so ready. I was so ready to go to prison. I was well prepared when I went to prison. I was so prepared. So if I ask a question in this room right now, and I say that privilege is anyone in this room that never experienced a metal detector in school, raise your hand. Look around. Everybody that has their hand up most likely looks like you. That's privilege, right? And for me to say that I never experienced that, that's sad. So now, when I go through a metal detector in school, right, when I first get arrested and I go through the metal detector, I already know what to do. Take off my jacket, I skip through, make sure I ain't got my belt on. I'm well versed in being criminalized, right? And I parked my car on the other side of the hospital because I was lost. We were lost. And I walked through, and I didn't experience not one metal detector. But me and Marcellus, we going to schools about a mile from here, and every one of them have metal detectors. So what's the justification for having a metal detector in an elementary school, in a middle school, and not having it in the college in the same neighborhood, if the neighborhood is dangerous? And we're the same people in the same geographically location, but our middle schools and our public schools have metal detectors, and our colleges don't, right? So, right, Judge? When we look at that and we see and we make the correlation, and you say, why the hell am I walking through a metal detector in a school where a kid has to learn, but here I am in this great, beautiful university, and I didn't see not one security guard, one metal detector. Nowhere made me feel uncomfortable about learning. But when I walk into a middle school, I feel uncomfortable just walking through the door. When you first walk through the door, you see cops and metal detectors. And then we become cool with it, right? So now, and a mile from here again, when we hear sirens, it's almost like the Mr. Softy truck. We sing with it. And when we hear fire trucks, we sing with it, like the Mr. Softy truck, because we come desensitized and so used to it that it becomes part of our fabric. Right, and I'm fortunate. My wife is here too. We live in a place where we hardly hear any sirens, and our children will not get used to that sound because they don't hear it in our neighborhood. But I'm from South Jamaica, Queens, where I grew up. I heard it every day, and I loved it. See, it sounds like that. I know how to do it. I became used to it. It became part of my fabric. So when I went to prison, I was well prepared for it because I already experienced it before I got there. So I knew exactly what to expect, and I adjusted. I went through, got naked. They spray you with cold water. I'm just giving you a little bit of experience. They spray you with cold water to get the lice off you. They make you shower in the cold water, and send you on your way in the number. So I just want to add one more thing. If we continue to objectify people, if we look at people as caseloads, as docket numbers, as non-human, if we can objectify them, we can kill them. We could discard them. We could throw them away. Because once you turn something into an object, it's no longer humanized. It's a piece of paper, it's a piece of garbage, and you can discard them. So if we continue to look at our children or our society as caseloads and docket numbers, we will treat them as such. So how we label people is very, very important.
Thank you, Mr. Mapp. Dr. Griffin.
I'll echo again.
Yes.
Because there are a few things that stood out from some of the statements before. And I'll start with just a little bit of background. I appreciate the fact that Judge Camacho mentioned the mentally ill or mental illness. I am a professor. I'm also a psychologist. We also have psychologists in training that are in the room. And so when we look at our students, when we look at people, there was a mention about dehumanization, right? Because if you don't understand a thing, if you don't understand the value of a thing, you're going to likely misuse and abuse it, right? And so if you don't see kids and students as human or of value, you're going to mistreat, right? And that's a part of the dehumanization, which leads to also criminalization and individuals being seen as a number and not people, right? You can misuse them, you can abuse them. But also when we talk about what happens in schools where there are metal detectors and there are different policies ranging from zero tolerance policies to even police being present, right? The SROs, the school resource officers in the building, it's important for us to also remember that there's a conditioning that's happening, right? You're getting kids used to, or certain kids, used to those processes. And so to your point, when or if they interface with the criminal justice system, they're used to it because there have been messages that have been sent, but also preparation, so to speak, for what could come later on down the line. So in terms of causes, to answer the question more directly, there's dehumanization and othering that happens. And that is consistent with what we were talking about related to bias, right? And systemic issues related to racism. And then also, now when you have an influx of individuals who may be immigrants, now they're seen as other, right? They may not be understood. And again, if you don't understand something or an individual, you're likely to mistreat, right? Also, when we look at individuals perhaps with disabilities, again, if you do not understand it, you don't understand the behavior, you don't understand history, you don't understand trauma, you're likely going to respond in a harsh way, right? When trying to manage and control behaviors that you don't understand. And if you're not intentional about trying to understand what's happening, why the behavior is happening, getting to the root cause, then yeah, it's going to be easy to criminalize. But you're still not addressing the root cause and the root issue. So we have that. We have gentrification that's also happening in different communities where now you have students and you have individuals that don't necessarily understand the communities that they're in or the history of the communities. So again, abuse and misuse is inevitable. So you have a range of causes that support and lead to this pipeline.
Thank you very much. We're going down the line.
Okay, I'm going to look at it from more of a policy standpoint, but I echo everything that every one of the panelists has said, and I think most specifically the dehumanification of our students and our young people. And I think if we look at really one of the main root causes is setting expectations on young people and then not giving them any supports to reach those goals. So we can say to a young person in the court system, if you want to be, if you want to comply with your terms of conditions of probation, you have to go to school every day. But they're not going to school every day if we don't give them the resources and the supports to make sure that they get there. If we don't listen to their story, as Judge Camacho said, if we don't know what's going on in their household, if we don't know what their family resources are, what their transportation issues are, what the impediments are to them getting to school, we can set that expectation, but it's not realistic. And then we're setting them up to fail. So if we don't listen to the barriers, if we don't address the barriers and just set the expectation, we expect you not to hang out with gang members. Well, that's not necessarily a realistic expectation. If that's who your neighbor is, if that's who your brother is, if that's who you have been ingrained with, if that's who you are, that's not a realistic expectation. So we have to surround you with the resources in any way possible to help you reach that expectation. And I feel as a policymaker, sometimes we fail to do that. We just set the expectation and we don't give the supports to help the young people get over the barriers to reach that expectation. And when we're talking about root causes, I think one of the things that we also really need to think about with young people, with people with disabilities, with mental health issues, is that we have to give our law enforcement more tools than just arresting people. Because I say to young people all the time, and I say to parents all the time, when you call the cops, they have one tool in their toolkit. And that tool is a hammer to arrest you. That's it. Those are the only tools that they really have. And so many parents call the police because they think that the police are going to come and they're going to yell at their child and they're going to parent their child and they're going to tell their child that that's not the way that they should be behaving. But those are not tools that we have supplied our law enforcement officials with. We have only given them the capability to arrest or walk away. So until we really train our law enforcement officers better on how to be supportive service members, so that we're actually putting services into place, that we're actually diverting from the system instead of bringing to the system, there's going to be a direct linkage right from school to prison.
Thank you very much. Mr. Saunders, please.
As a human being, we all have what is called implicit bias. To piggyback off my co-panelists just stated about perception and expectation. Your perception of me will determine your expectation for me. I repeat, your perception of me will determine your expectations for me. When you're in a system that is predominantly female and Caucasian in regards to instruction, Juwanja Kunjufu wrote this book, Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, a long time ago, volume 1, 2, and 3 for you readers. In that book, he talks about the third grade stare down between that Caucasian female teacher and that young melanated male who is growing in size, maybe taller than she is at that stage. And it dims the light of that student. That student may raise his hand and gets ignored because of the implicit bias that exists. Then that student goes into the point of, that's one of the panelists mentioned the fact that he was very bright and he decided to dumb himself down to fit in. But what about those who have reading disabilities? What about those students who have dyslexia and is not diagnosed? Therefore, they start acting out because they can't read. You actually call on that student to read, and they can't read, so they're embarrassed. You get more respect if you're the class clown and you can't read than if you actually can't read. So they determine that. And now when you have that situation, it's called insubordination, when you don't do it exactly what the teachers say do. Now you go into ISS for insubordination. Now it's a paper trail building on your discipline history. Then when you look at the elementary school scores, a lot of people don't realize that they look at your elementary school state assessments to do a projection of how many people are going to be incarcerated. So education is connected to the perception that they have of you when it comes down to if you're going to be incarcerated or not. So therefore, the poverty now you're dealing with poverty. I'm undereducated and I'm impoverished, or I may be wrongly accused of something like Khalif Browder, for example. Khalif Browder, those of you who need to watch the documentary, was arrested for a book bag for something that he really didn't do. And he got lost in the system because he couldn't afford the bail. So the bail is an issue in regards to finances. And then you're dealing with legal aid lawyer versus paid lawyer, which also is part of the causes in this situation. So when you really break it down, it comes down to poverty and finances and laws. One of the brothers mentioned Michelle Alexander's book. I strongly recommend that you read that. I strongly recommend that you watch 13th. I strongly recommend that you understand that the system is designed for you to be incarcerated. If they never treated you right, they're never going to teach you right. Let me repeat that. If the system never treated you right, they're never going to teach you right. That's a battle that I fight every day. I call it the war on both sides. Being an advocate for my students and fighting, and they don't realize that you are fighting for them behind the scenes with your colleagues. The parents are so traumatized from their experience in school, they think you're an enemy because you wear the uniform of a suit and tie, not realizing that you are their child's only hope behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. So you're fighting on one side with parents, then you're fighting on the other side with your colleagues, and you're stuck in the middle. Mm-hmm. But I was taught a long time ago by a wise person that you got to love your people more than they hate you at times, and you got to continue to do the work. And eventually those parents will come around because they will see that you're different from your colleagues. They will see that you have their child's best interests at hand. So understand, perception is real. Implicit bias is real. And we got to change that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we went over what is the school to prison pipeline. We went over what are some of the causes, right? And so now we'll progress to what are some of the consequences. And we may, again, right, some of these questions, they overlap a little bit in your explanation when you're talking about, how did it begin and what are some of the things that we can identify from. But now, what are some of the consequences? And so we'll go to Dr. Griffin for this.
Consequences. So we've spoken about a lot. We know that it starts in school. So if a child is suspended, that means less academic or exposure to academic instruction. So a child who is already struggling is going to struggle a little bit more because now they're away from that instructional time. But then also, we don't know what's happening when they're not in school. A lot of children do rely on school for a degree of consistency, security, food, right? A lot of resources. And so when they're away from the academic institution, there's a loss of instruction. They're away from and isolated from that social environment. So the opportunities to possibly restore, right, and provide resources becomes limited. And then after that, we have individuals that, again, if they're now expelled, they're pushed out, possibly to their own devices, into a system, and they have to understand how to navigate that system. So if there's loss of academic instruction, we know that education is associated with economic potential and growth and other opportunities. So it then can spiral from there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mapp?
So since I've been here, I've been trying to paint you pictures because I want you to visualize some of the stuff that we're speaking about on this panel. So there was a kid when I was growing up. His name was Ed Booger Smith, and he's from Brooklyn. And he was probably one of the best basketball players that came out of Brooklyn, right? And he went from elementary school to middle school to high school to D1 college and didn't get drafted, right? But I'm talking about, when I say exceptionally well, I was pretty decent, but I was nowhere nothing like him. He didn't get drafted, and he could not read. He could not read at all. I'm talking about a lick. He didn't even know how to sign his name, and he went from elementary school all the way to D1 college to not getting drafted. So a consequence for Ed Booger Smith is today he can't get a job because his jump shot has faded. His crossover doesn't exist anymore. And that's the consequence. So what does No Child Left Behind mean? Right? Do we just continually to push them into prison, into that pipeline? Those kids that have dyslexia, those kids that have learning disabilities, those kids that are exceptionally well. And I'm throwing my brother out here right now, he's not uneducated, he's really smart, but a musician who can sing, who can rap, who can play basketball, and we just push them through the system without no kids understanding that if they don't make it, right? If they don't make it, what happens? What are the consequences of pushing these kids through who are very good in athleticism, who plays football and basketball, who don't make it? What are the consequences? The consequences is absolute failure and 100% prison. Those are the consequences. Absolute failure and 100% prison. He can't teach his kids. He can't teach his grandchildren. None of those things. And those are the consequences. Constantly pushing people through the system, through education, because I gotta get him out of my class. Push him to the 5th grade, push him to the 6th grade. My granddaughter, she just went to middle school, and she was struggling with multiplication. And she's like, they don't help us. Because just the last thing I'm gonna say. A teacher in school, and I commend every educator on this panel, has to be a parent, a correction officer, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a relationship expert, everything, and they don't start teaching until about 2 o'clock. Right? After they get through all of those other professions, they don't start teaching until about 2 o'clock. So how are our children supposed to learn if they have to do all of those things first, because none of them things are in place to address those issues before the child gets to class? A nutritionist?
Definitely.
You have to be a nutritionist as a teacher, like all of those things, right? How can you teach if you have to be all of these things first before you put your syllabus on the board?
That was interesting. That was really interesting because off the cuff, and my constituents are telling me that I'm on the clock here. But how important is diet in all of this? I mean, is that a factor in some way, or is that too far out of the range of what we're talking about?
No, it's a pretty significant factor, right? Food security is important. The way that you eat also impacts the way your brain is able to function, right? But it also can impact your behavior. So, we talk about exposure and access to healthy food options or access to unhealthy food options, right? Which can, if you think about it, if a child is exposed to unhealthy food, a lot of sugar, then they might start to perform and present as hyperactive, right? If no one understands that perhaps they haven't had a balanced, nutritious meal, then they're going to likely judge, or they could judge the behavior and then become a little more punitive instead of, again, addressing the root cause. So it impacts how people function, how we all function.
I think just to piggyback on that, I think all of us can kind of relate to how you feel when you're starving, right? When you haven't had, and we're not starving. Starving's not the right word, right? But when we're hungry and maybe we're irritable, right? And if I'm at school and I'm sitting in a class and I've been in this chair and I'm irritable and somebody nudges me the wrong way, I'm going to react differently, right? I'm going to snap. I might do something that I might not do if I had a balanced meal in the past 48 hours. And that might lead to an assault or some kind of disruptive behavior in the classroom. So it absolutely can impact just on behavior and reaction.
It's a basic need. It's one of many basic needs, right, that we all need to have met. And so kids, individuals need to have their basic needs met so that they can even be available to the environment, right, to process information that they're learning, whatever's presented in the environments that they're in.
Yes, Judge.
You really want to talk about dying? Let's look at it really dying. So let me tell you about some of the young people in my court.
I'm sorry, Judge, before you finish, and I want to hear your thought, but we said dieting. How far?
Dieting? I thought you said dying. Well, you know what? We can talk about dying then, because I thought you said dying, so I'm thinking dying. But this thought came to mind. I got many young people in my court because of all these reasons are angry. They're angry at the world because of the racism and the prejudice and inequality. They're mad, they're angry, and they really don't care. They go out there. I got a bunch of kids right now who I love, all of them, shooting each other's houses because they don't really care about dying. They engage in reckless behavior because it is not. They are so angry at the world that they don't care. And my job in this court is I have these two groups who are actually shooting at each other every weekend, and I love all of them. Like, oh, stop. So I mistakenly heard dying, but it sort of clicked.
Yes, but it was necessary, right? Because it's true. And just to piggyback off of the diet, I can remember how can you focus in class if you're hungry?
Yeah.
You come, and we're not talking about us as adults who have the equipment to just grab a bite to eat on our way to school or college or work. We're talking about children who may not have basic sustenance in their own home, right. and they don't know how to articulate the fact that they're hungry, because if they say something like, "I'm hungry, I didn't eat," they're going to be ridiculed, right? And we oftentimes forget the power of pressure from peers. Even as adults in the workspace, we can feel some pressure when we don't got the latest clothes or a nice bag, or if our hair and nails is not done, or if we pulling up in a hoopty versus a new car, we feel that pressure. We like, I gotta get to the bag, and you're stressed out a little bit. So just imagine how a child feels an undeveloped mind, undeveloped emotions, undeveloped ability to communicate and ask for the things that he or she needs, right? So, Lightfoot, I got a specific question for you, but we're going to get back to you in a moment, okay? So very briefly, before we get to our final segment, I want to call up my partner, Marcellus, and he's going to make a special introduction. Matt, we're just going to let him do it, okay? Thank you.
This is the youth component, so we're going to have youth come up and tell their story. I'm pretty sure they're nervous, because if I was their age, I would definitely be nervous. But y'all can stay. Don't leave, everybody. Don't leave, lady. Please, turn around. Come back. Rayshawn Newsom, this is a young man that I've known for years. He's been through the struggle. He's able to articulate his struggle, and he's on the struggle right now. Rayshawn, come on up. While he's walking. Before he takes the mic, I would like to shout out a couple more people before they leave. Antonio Cardeline, she's one of the person that introduced me to Bob Castillo, and she's one of the reasons I'm standing here. And Tyson's, who he's hugging right now, Laquita Robinson. She's very influential. She works at the JDC. Matter of fact, she runs the JDC. That's the Juvenile Detention Center. So hopefully she don't leave. If you want to, get a card, as you can get anybody else's card, and sign up in the back if you're willing to participate with us and or help us. One more, Curtis Watts. He's the barber in the neighborhood, but he does much more than that. He counsels. He has his own organization where he counsels troubled youth and youth inside the community. Not through barbering. He does basketball and a lot of other stuff. Rayshawn, take the mic.
How you doing? I'm Rayshawn Newsom. Let me get it together. But how I feel about the situation, I done been to jail. I used to be a good kid in school. It's just the environment I moved to. It's like the brother up here was saying, I'm from Hempstead, New York, from Albemarle, a big crack block. So like I kinda fell to it early. Like school was cool and all of that, but like I said, I got tricked. I started seeing all the flashy things that my mom couldn't get me, and I put school on the back burner, and I just wanted to get money, I guess. And it caused me to go through a lot of things in life. I think that one thing that will make the community is better is if parents get more in tune with their children. As far as school, like, I don't ever remember asking my mom to help me with a piece of homework. She never came to no parent-teacher conferences, so I felt like I could get away with everything as far as school. Even right now, I got 2 kids, a daughter that's 8 and 3, and I had to check myself a lot of times because I sit in my phone a lot, and I'm worrying about what's going on in the outside world, social media, and when you should really be focusing on your kids and how they doing in school. And that's the main thing. Like, kids is a blessing, but the era is not the same no more. It's a lot of babies having babies and not knowing how to raise the babies. So they just forget about them, you know what I mean? They let them raise themselves. And I had that issue. I raised myself once my grandmother died. So it's like, turned to the streets. I needed attention. That's another thing. You got to show your kids attention. You can't just do what you want to do, be in your phone all day, because the kid's going to feel like, well, I need attention. That was my issue. I needed attention, and I wasn't getting the attention I needed at home. So when I go to school and act out, and I felt like that was the right attention. It was the wrong attention. Previously just came home about 2 months ago. I was locked up for about 15, 16 months. And it's not good in there at all. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But I learned a lot. I learned how to curb my anger. I learned where to put the good energy at. I learned how to take bad energy and turn it into some good energy. And I think that's just the main thing. You just gotta focus more on the future, which is the kids. That's all I gotta say about it.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you.
The next young man, his story is a little different, but this has been my comrade coming to speak to the middle schools, coming to speak to different schools just because of his story. And with the help of certain people, Miss Luke's in the back, another Bob, he was able to start his own nonprofit organization. I always get the name wrong, but he'll tell you the right one. Rising Stars. Was that right? Future Stars. Oh, damn, I ain't going for 3. Go away. Stars of Tomorrow. Kind of similar, but I always get it wrong. One more person I forgot to shout out. He just arrived not too long ago. I remember when I was in Nassau County in that solitary confinement, and he used to slide newspapers under my door. And as Tyson articulated and Mr. Mapp articulated, reading at that time was so important because it took my mind off. And I was on a plexiglass tier, so you only got 1 hour out, and you had plexiglass on the bars. So it was really dehumanizing, and that little piece of paper, newspaper, let me read and keep in touch with society. So I want to thank him and appreciate Ujima. Without any further ado, Raekwon, come on up.
How you guys doing today?
All right.
All right. I grew up in a crazy, not crazy, but the era I grew up in was wild. Keith Saunders, this is my man right here. He was my dean in middle school. My dean, he in Hempstead. I was in ABGS middle school, and he was my dean, and he stayed on me. He stayed on me. He really wanted the best for me, but I didn't want the best for myself at a young age. I wasn't part of the streets, but I was gang related. That's 2 different things, being gang related and part of the streets. I wasn't part of the streets. 6th grade, I mean, the first time I had got in trouble, I had got sent to his office. And he was asking me sitting there, he was asking, where your coat at? It was like wintertime. And I got written up and I got sent to his office. He's like, where your coat at? I was like, I just had on a hoodie. He called my mother. You know how that made me feel? I had a coat at home, but I just didn't care. I didn't want to wear it at the time. During that winter, I was never wearing a coat. But January 07, that's when my life changed. I had got cut on my right arm. February 07 is when it dramatically changed. I had a TBI. Anyone know what that stands for? Mm-hmm. Yes. I had got stabbed over here, stabbed in my temple. I had to learn how to do everything all over. Walk, write. I'm originally right-handed, but I had to learn how to write with my left, learn how to do everything with my left hand. But now it's like I was basically born left because I could do majority everything with my left hand. I was like 24 when I got my, I'm 30 now. It was like 24 when I got my license. When I got my license, everybody's like, how you gonna drive? How you gonna drive? How you gonna do this? How you gonna do that? But I did it. I never gave up. I mean, one day I graduated from Roosevelt High School. And Mr. Saunders seen me playing basketball one day at Centennial Park. And he was like, you still the same. You still ball like you ball in middle school. I never gave up my ability to do anything. You know what I mean? Like, I went through two stages of depression. I was like 15 when I went through the first stage, and the second stage is when I graduated high school in 2012. You know what caused the depression? Because I realized, like, I couldn't do what I used to do. That's what caused a traumatic breakdown at the time. A traumatic breakdown. But since then, I just been giving back to the community. I think it was 2013, 14. Mr. Saunders invited me to Union High School. Is when I met my guy Marcellus. And since then, I just been on good pages. good terms. You know what I mean? Volunteering with the youth. You know why I volunteer with the youth? Because the youth is our future. They're really our future. I don't have kids, but I have a niece and a nephew, and I have younger siblings that look up to me as a father figure. Not saying the father not in their life. My father and my niece and nephew father not in their life, but they look up to me. My nephew, he called me the other day, Uncle Quan, can I come over and play football? He looked up to me. So, you know what I mean? I got to take that as a stepping stone, and I have to use it to my ability to help him. But I'm gonna tell y'all about my organization. My organization is called Stars of Tomorrow. I came up with that name because today, the youth they just be giving up on a lot, and they don't want to reach for the stars. 1 second, I'm sorry. Yes, my nonprofit organization, Stars of Tomorrow, is to affect gang prevention and intervention strategies to provide alternative to incarceration, to provide mentoring, to provide healing for those youth who are most affected by the trauma of violence, prevention, and racism. That's my goal. Because when I was in school, I didn't have my father, he was in and out of prison when I was growing up. So I really didn't have, you know what I mean? I had an uncle, but it's two differences between an uncle and a father. Uncle, that's your relative, but my main, that was my father. He wasn't there. That's not why I went to the streets, but he wasn't in my life like he is now. Me and my father's like this now. We conversate on a regular basis, and like I tell him, I haven't told my father I love him since elementary school. Other day we just talking. I just said I love you, bro. I said I love you. You know what I mean? Because it's better to get your feelings out before it's too late. For real. One more thing. I'm sorry. I just got one more statement. Every day is a fresh start, a new chance to make things happen. Learn from yesterday. Live for today. Hope for tomorrow. Life is like a mirror. It smile at you if you smile at it. Thank you.
They both did dynamic. Rayshawn was sweating a little bit back there, but you got to understand. He said he just came out maybe 2 months ago. Y'all are intimidating audience. To come to a college and speak with this professional panel behind you was an amazing thing.
100%.
Miss Lukes, Raekwon blew it out the frame. I didn't expect him to do that good. So he definitely stepped his game up. Because when I first had him speak maybe 6 years ago, he was. But you killed it, bro. You killed it, man. I'm proud of you. And I'm sure Dean Sanders is proud of you also.
Yeah, that was amazing. We did not bring those two young men up as tokens of, like we trying to keep it real. Like we bring some two guys up here to tell their story, to show you that we're connected to the community. We brought them up because as a CRC, as a new organization that brings professionals together to correct some of the issues going on in our communities, we collectively thought about how we could impact you guys in a positive way. So we decided, it was a conscious decision to bring some individuals who had made transformations or are in the stages of transformation from real tragedy. And so that's why we brought them, to show you that as a Community Reentry Consortium, we're not just the same old community-based organization talking about saving prisoners and people. No, these are conscious minds. History is being made. We have a judge, we have district attorney, college professors, doctors, elite minds speaking about the issues in our societies that shouldn't really exist, but they do exist. So we've come together so that we can begin to remedy the issues that affect us all, because if they don't affect you directly, they will affect you indirectly by your neighbor, by the person sitting next to you, right? You're going to be in positions of power and influence. And so we put together something consciously and collectively and tirelessly, right? I don't know if you know Leanne, but she is a stickler for perfection. And then Christian, oh my God, she's number 2. And they're sitting here, and I'm sweating a little bit, and I've done this a million times, and they got me thinking this is my first time speaking in front of people because of how passionate they are about getting this correct. Not the event. The event is easy. This is what we do. But the real connection between professionals and up and coming. It's not about us. We're just telling our story, hoping that we impact you guys in some sort of way. Many times I question whether I want to continue to tell my story about being in prison, because I'm like, does that limit me? Does prison define me? Does that make me who I am? No, but that's my story. And so I utilize my story to probably reach others who are in similar or close to similar situations, right? And before I pass it, before I give it back to our panel with this final question, I have a theory. And my theory is that when the water washes up on the bank of a beach and moves just one grain of sand, then the whole world was changed, right? And the reason why it's important, when we're talking about a grain of sand, a grain of sand is something that seems like it's insignificant. It's many grains of sand. Matter of fact, they're irritating when you walk on the beach, right? Sand is all in your toes, and it's a nuisance. But something small like somebody's consciousness or their feeling or how they look at the world, when you change that, when you move that grain of sand from one position to another, then that thing is different. Right? So that thing that we're speaking about is your level of consciousness, and we're hoping that we can somehow positively make you different. But again, I'm sorry I'm holding you guys up. I know you've been working and going to school all day. You want to get home to your kids. You want to eat something. When we put this together, some people didn't know that I had ulterior motives of why I wanted to do this, right? The panel was probably just the outer covering of me and Marcellus and the rest of the team creating an event where we could say thank you to some key people, right? We wanted to acknowledge that working with returning citizens in such a capacity is difficult. There's political things that you got to take into consideration. There's some background checks. We got to find out who this guy Tyson is. And so we know that it's difficult, right? And so what we want to do is we want to acknowledge 3, right? We can't acknowledge all, but we want to acknowledge a few people for their continued support and participation in helping us create this event, making this platform and future platforms possible, and just the CRC in general. Okay, so I'd like to, Bob, did Bob leave? No. Great, he left. So Bob, come on up, my man, Bob. Bob is the reason why we're here. Bob allowed me to tell my story of incarceration and transformation about 6 or 7 times to his criminal justice class. Marcellus introduced me to him. I call him Mr. Costello. He corrects me and says that we're colleagues. My name is Bob. And so he takes us, every time we speak to his class, he takes us to a nice lunch at Capitol Grill. He pays the bill, you know what I'm saying? And he won't take any help. And that's really dope. And one of his students asked me, why I want to speak to his class. And my answer was simple, was because this is my life's dream. When I was laying in the cell and constructing my life and envisioning how it would be, one of the things that I envisioned was telling my story to a college campuses and university for the sake of utilizing my experiences to touch future minds, right? I mean, I think that's a noble occupation, and I've achieved my goal. So come on up here and receive this certificate so I can say thank you. Yeah. That's for you, my man. You ain't getting away. You say thank you on the mic. Come on.
This guy's unbelievable, right? I mean, wow. Marcellus, I should say. I want to thank you guys. It's been wonderful connecting, having this event. Leanna, Kristen, you guys have done a wonderful job. I want to thank the panelists up here for doing everything they've done. The audience, you guys have been a great audience. Hopefully you learned a lot. And we got your emails. We're going to be sending out more information about future events. We hope to see you in the future. Thank you very much.
Now, for our final, yeah, right. You thought you was getting away? Come on up here, Leanne. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. What kind of guy would I be, huh? I should have called you up first, ladies first, but I'm sorry. Come on, don't you go nowhere. Show some of that swag.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for being here. As Bob said, I do hope that you've learned a lot. I mean, we've had such an illustrious panel. So thank you, everybody.
They said don't do this. They said don't be long-winded, Tyson. We're on a tight schedule. Kristen over there, she's mad. She's going to talk to me later. She's going to send out an extensive email. I know you guys want to go, but just please. And if this would not be possible, we really would not be here. This guy gets mixed reviews in the communities because he's so selfless. He's out 3 a.m. chasing people, children. Mothers call him, can you find my son? I haven't seen him in 4 days. He's upstate. He's in Chicago. He's all over. He has issues with his own son staying the course, right? And how oxymoronic is that in life that he's donating his time and energy to reform his life to help the community, and his own son is giving him challenges that sometimes when it's our own children, our professional skills, they don't really work. Like, you can have all the psychology and all the counseling techniques, and, I don't know if you know, but they say don't try this on your own family. Right? When you're going through any sort of training, they say, don't try this on your family because it don't work. It hits you differently. It hits you in the emotions. And we know, Judge, right, when your emotion get involved, it's difficult to maintain rational thought and clarity. And so we try to stay level-headed. We try to keep our emotions subdued, right? The guy I'm talking about is Marcellus Morris. Come on up here, man. Certificate of appreciation. This guy is a king.
Thank you. I didn't know who he was talking about until he said Chicago. But I'll sentiment everything everybody else said. We couldn't have asked for a better crowd. We couldn't ask for a better panel. I mean, this panel right here is historic. And stuff that they revealed to the audience is historic. I think a lot of people will remember this day. We have a few advocate organizations in here, rappers here. I don't know who these young people are with these shirts on. They seem like they're advocates for something. Hopefully they'll be a part of this CRC. Peace.
Please, thank you. Thank you, guys. Now, for our final question to the panel, I know you guys are tired. All right, so we're going to let you guys, if I can find my last question. Okay. Did I act? Where's my last? Do I have a last question, Kristen? I do. Help me out, because, I said this wasn't going to happen.
Give a round of applause to the host, man. He's been doing phenomenal. Tyson, man. Great job, man. Great job.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, panel, how you guys feeling? You still with me?
Yes, we're here.
You guys are good? All right, we appreciate your patience. We appreciate you being here for this historical moment. So our final question or questions is, and we're going to begin with the judge. What risk factors should educators and school counselors look for to prevent young people from being sucked into the pipeline, right? What risk factors, what indicators should we look for so that we can begin to dismantle this?
Well, in my court, we look at 5 things. We look at the lack of affordable housing. I have 15, 16-year-old homeless kids. I get calls from Principal Sibley's, my friend at Wine Dance. Judge, I got this kid who's living in a garage. I just had to give him a sandwich outside in the high school today. There are homeless kids sleeping in stolen cars, garages. Had one kid sleeping on his grandmother's assisted living center on a couch in the lobby. Homelessness, lack of affordable housing. Trauma, trauma, trauma. It is all about trauma. These kids have suffered more than I will suffer in a million lifetimes. They want to be numb. They shut down. They start using at 11, 10, because they don't want to feel the pain anymore. Trauma. Look for those kids who walk around the hallways with their heads down. Mental illness. And angry kids. They call it oppositional defiance disorder. I call it righteous anger. I'm mad at you. I'm mad at all of you because you've all let me down. Every day in my court I said, kid, stop being so angry. You can't fight the world. The world's going to win. Let it go, man. Let it go. Those angry kids who are yelling back at you teachers, don't say, oh, get him out. I don't ever want to see this kid again. Figure out why this kid is angry. There's a good reason. And I say to children all the time, kids in my court all the time, kid, you have a right to be angry. If I were you, I'd be angry too. But you're still here. You survived all of it. You're a survivor. You can do this. Education. I got kids who haven't been educated since 6th grade. They act out. They get suspended, passed on to the next educational place, suspended. I got kids who haven't gone to school since the 6th grade. Housing, substance use, mental illness, education. And last but not least, I want to go back to gangs that you talked about. One of my favorite people in the world is a guy named Gary Williams. He came to my courtroom in Queens many years ago. He was blood from Jamaica, top blood from Jamaica. I love this kid. We got him into college. We got him a football scholarship. And we used to have a lot of conversations after. I said, Gary, why you were blood? He said, George, you don't get it, man. My dad was a blood. My uncles were bloods. All my friends were bloods. I was born a blood. That's who I am. And I got my other friend who says, I said, Kai, why are you Crip? I had nobody. No family. Nobody cared about me. I wanted somebody to have my back. I wanted to be part of something. Crips, I'm with you, man. And he said to me, Judge, not every member of a gang is a bad guy. And not every guy who's not a member of a gang is a good guy. Some of my favorite people in the world were associated with gangs, and some still are.
Thank you.
So those are the 4 things the 5 things that I would look out for. And can I just say one more thing?
Of course.
It's sort of controversial, but it's important because it came to my head. Talking about Stars of Tomorrow. There's a lot of money, federal money, state money, grants. It's everywhere. Those local, community-based not-for-profits aren't seeing a dime of it. Where's it going? Ask questions. He deserves some of that money. My friend, my friend Nancy Jones, she got out of jail, started Miracle Plus, local, and Wine Dance. She drives kids around for me, taking them to different appointments in her 20-year-old car. I drive by one of none of the providers are here. I drive by one of these big provider facilities. There's like 20 vans sitting there doing nothing. Come on, folks, where's the money going? Give it to him. Give it to my friend Nancy Jones.
And let me get a little bit too. Lightfoot, sir, how are you? Still with me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you please expound?
Yeah. Okay, so for me, the bottom line, if you're looking at indicators that's going to, keep this whole school to prison pipeline viable, is looking at police in schools, armed police in schools, SROs in schools. Bottom line, they don't belong there, and the track record is poor of the interaction between students and police officers, particularly in communities where police are seen as a threat, and there's a disconnect and dislike, between the community members and the police. So I think schools need to reclaim their students. Communities need to reclaim their children. If you have schools in a capitalist society that is all about profit over people, and we have what we call a neoliberal educational reform agenda, neoliberal educational reform agenda. And what that says is that it seeks to privatize public institutions. So when you privatize public institutions, like schools, like libraries, like parks and stuff forth, then you turn them into profit engines. And that's not the definition of public, institutions. Our tax dollars should pay for that, and they should be funded, from other sources than from a capitalistic model, that seeks, of course, cheap labor and so forth. So when we see, us turning over our students to armed police, and there's resistance as children will try adults, they will try authority, and you got police officers, handcuffing 6-year-old girls to, the railing. You got them fighting 14, 15, 16-year-old girls and boys, body slamming them. There was an officer, the video went viral a few years back, where he actually, those armchairs, he actually picked her up in the armchair because she refused to get out of the seat and slung her against the wall. So, every day you can look and you see what's going on when they interact with our students, when they should be there. But there was a program I call the attention to. It's called the DARE program. It started back in the 80s, I believe. I think Daryl Gates, the police officer, he was the chief of police back in Los Angeles, and he, came to find, they found out, he was involved in a lot of racist, activity and so forth, and resistance with the community. So this DARE program is, I think it stands for Drug Abuse Resistance Education. And so they had these police officers, and they turned these police officers into teachers. They didn't go to school to teach and learn, how to prepare, and pedagogically deliver lessons, instructions, and so forth. But they turned them into teachers, and it was their job, as they saw it, to educate about, saying no to drugs, like what Nancy Reagan did. This was back in the 80s, saying that, drugs is a bad thing, guns are bad, violence is bad, and if you see anybody using drugs, you should report them. You should, resist if they try to get you to do it. And they began, using these kids, as if, they were soldiers in the war on drugs, and actually turning them into snitches. And nobody likes a snitch, and so they encouraged them. They would cozy up to them, get into a relationship with them, and get them to snitch on their parents, and said, do they smoke marijuana? Do they use cocaine? Do they? And you saw, time after time again, parents' homes getting raided, and their parents getting arrested, the kids going into the system, and all from this DARE program, that started back in the 80s. It's died down a little bit now, but, in its heyday, it was bad news. And we still have, these SROs, these armed officers, just traumatizing the kids in school, and under the guise of helping them and trying to encourage them to do their job for them. Turning kids into police when you're in 6th and 8th grade or even younger is an unfortunate relationship. So for me, if you're looking for an indicator of what's going to keep this thing going, look for the way we relate and connect. These police officers and these SROs, into schools. It's all right, we got schools have been shot up regularly. We get the schools, having, problems. But they should be on the perimeter of the school grounds. They should not be in school, in our classrooms, teaching our kids. What happened to going and sending them to the principal? A young man said he was sent to the principal, to the dean. And making sure that you, as the counselor, as the principal, as the dean, as the superintendent, it's your job. You, in cooperation and relationship with those parents in that community, to discipline your kids and not expose them to the criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system.
Wow. Mr. Saunders, if I'm asking that question about educators and school counselors, I mean, you have to add on.
Yes, sir. In reference to an analogy that you made earlier about that grain of sand, when you deal with a grain of sand, it's so minute and small and finite that you got to be really delicate with it. But when you get a lot of sand, you can mold it and shape it into whatever you want it to be. That analogy is relevant to our children. Our children are that valuable grain of sand. And when you're able to mold them, no matter what their circumstances are at home, no matter what their circumstances are in the streets, if you take the time out to get to know and connect with that student, you can change their lives by yourself. And it will be a domino effect, because now when they have children, they're changing their lineage now. Now they're correcting mistakes that their parents made with their children, and it keeps going. That being said, risk factors with your children, look at mood changes. If your child went from very happy and loving and caring all of a sudden solemn, there's a problem. Look for mood changes. As teachers in the room, if your student was fully engaged and now they're just off to the side, there's something wrong. You need to connect with that student, refer that student to a psychologist, social worker, make a call home. A lot of teachers don't call home to investigate, to find out what's wrong. Engagement. If a student was fully engaged in sports and different activities and all of a sudden stop, there's an issue. Clothing. If all of a sudden your child wants to wear all blue all the time, or all red all the time, or all black all the time, something should go off in your head that something is not right. They're connecting with the wrong people. Trauma. The generational trauma from Big Mama to grandma all the way down has to be addressed. We don't have enough social workers and psychologists in the system. There's no way, when I was in Uniondale High School, when I first started, we had 2 social workers for 2,300 students and 2 psychologists. 2. 1 retired, so we was down to 1.
Wow.
There's no way you can deal with the needs of a population with just 2 psychologists. So we need, the way things are now with the amount of trauma and the amount of young people coming in who are immigrants, we need people who speak Spanish and the other languages to also be part of the solution. Family. The family dynamic is extremely important. As educators and as parents, we need to connect with our children. Not just be providers, like some of our parents were, a relationship with our children, and hold them accountable. Forget this stuff, you can't beat your children. You're right, you cannot abuse your child, but you can correct the behavior of your child. If you start early, with my children, if my voice is raised, they don't want to disappoint me because of how I raised them. I don't have to touch you. The disappointment from the inflection in my voice let them know that there's a problem. Lastly, anger. That anger comes from somewhere. And when you realize it comes from somewhere, you can't take it personal, because it's not about you. What's about you is connected with them to find out why they are angry. And listen. We talk too much. We make decisions for children without listening to children. We have to listen to children and find out what their needs are and how we can help them, because they know, because they're living it. And lastly, we need a database. Like we asked for a database for corrupt cops who get fired in one jurisdiction and move to another one and still get hired. We need a database of teachers of the same thing. Because we have some horrible, horrible teachers who get fired from this location and get hired over there. So we need to develop these databases. We need the parents to be more vocal and hold myself accountable. Hold the system that I work for that is so corrupt and so disheartening but my energy is I can't give up because I got to love my people and my kids and their parents more than they hate me. And eventually, they will come around.
Thank you. You guys hung out for a while, and we appreciate you. So before we close out and open up for questions and answers, we just have one or two more questions we want to ask. We want to hear from specific minds. Would you like to touch on that, Dr. Griffin, before I go to the next question?
I would,
Because
actually.
I saw you wanted to add on, so let's hear it.
The only thing that I would add would be when we're focusing on the individual, also it follows with listening, right? Because we have victimization. We have kids that are being victimized in different ways, whether sexually abused or exposed to violence. So we need to listen. Those mood changes, right? Whether it's the increase in irritability, the sadness, or them becoming withdrawn, if they cry out, if they're trying to access and seek help, and there's no one who's willing to listen, it's a problem. If we're ignoring things like bullying, right? We have to look at who's the bully and also who's the victim and provide different supports for them as well. So those are the additional risk factors that I would add for the individual. And then also when looking at the system, we have to look at systems that are at risk for this process being implemented. And those are the systems that do not provide alternatives to those zero tolerance policies. And they're not thinking about how they can restore, how they can teach, how they can build skills, because again, behavior is a symptom. Behavior is communicating something. So if the system isn't looking and the individuals within the system aren't looking to understand why something is happening and they're just being punitive, that's a problem. You're going to still have the issue. So the system is at risk if it's not even considering alternatives.
Wonderful, thank you. It's almost like treating the symptom instead of the root cause.
Yes.
Good. So, our one of our final questions would be to you, Ms. Raya, and that is: once a young person ends up in the courts or detention, what can be done to disrupt that pipeline?
Well, I think that there's a lot that can be done. I think that we have to look at every single entry point within the system and find ways that we can support and divert. So I think that we work really hard to talk to kids about what their passions are, what their goals are, what they're interested in, and trying to use the power of the court system or the power of probation to make linkages to community-based organizations and programs that can help support them and help them gain strengths in other areas. Because truthfully, the court system is overcrowded with people that do not need to be there. The court system is overcrowded with mental health issues. The court system is overcrowded with kids who have been penalized unnecessarily for domestic violence issues or issues that could be handled in the school as opposed to the courts. So I think that if we look at every single entry system and we actually listen to the young people and give them a voice and then use our power within the system to address those needs, not only look at the problems, but look at the strengths. And one of the biggest problems in the system itself is that we don't listen to our young people. I think Judge Camacho touched on it earlier. We create policies for kids without ever hearing from the kids. That goes true in education as much as it does in the court system, that we create rules and restrictions without giving the kids a voice in what that should be. So if we take the time and we listen to the stories and we listen to the young people and we see where the impediments are, we see where the hurdles are, then we can start really using real life to start overcoming them. But if we, as a group of educated adults, sit here and try to solve the problem, we're going to fail. Because if we don't listen to the children, we're never going to really understand what the problem is. So I think once they get into the system, we really have to take the time to give them a voice, and not only give them that voice, but listen to it. And when we hear what they have to say, when we hear where the trauma stems from, and we hear what the issues are, we need to put services in place to address that. And then when we hear what they're passionate about, when we hear what their goals are, we need to do everything in our power to get them to that step, to do whatever we can to support them. And in that, they're going to have amazing lessons about being a leader, about getting along in a group setting. They're going to have all of those lessons, but they're going to be intertwined in things that they're passionate about, so they're going to hear them in a whole different way. One of the things that we see all the time is kids in the school setting who only show up at school because they love football. They go to school because they want to play football. And then they get disciplined, and the first thing they say to that young person is, oh, you're off the team. You can't play football anymore. And now that young person isn't coming to school. So if we take what they're passionate about and we use it as a lesson, as an encouragement, as a support instead of a punishment, then we can support that young person better.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, this is not the conclusion. The last half will be questions and answers, but we want to just give our wonderful panel another round of applause.
Tyson, before you go on, I just want, because we got to get our audience engaged, make sure that everybody's still woke and moving around. I just want to ask 2 questions for them to take home with them before you go further.
Got you.
So the first question is, first let me ask you a question. Anybody in this room been in a college classroom before? Anybody? All right, so you're pretty smart, right? Name one positive word that comes behind juvenile. One positive word. Detention, delinquent. Name one positive word that is placed behind juvenile. I want you to think about that. You don't have to tell me the answer now. And the second question is, why is it a priority to put asylum seekers to work before we put their children into education, into school?
Wow.
Think about it as a systemic problem. Why is it a priority to put asylum seekers to work before we put their children in school? That's the second thing I want you to think about. And I apologize.
No.
But I had those questions in my heart, and I need those questions answered tomorrow. Right?
I'm glad you asked that question. I was looking for some sort of powerful segue to go into the questions, and you helped. You had an answer for that, didn't you? The juvenile, what comes after that. Did you have an answer for that?
No, I wrote the question
Oh,
down
because I saw you writing over there.
But
I got to stop because I'm worse than the panelists. I'm over here having my own discussion. we can't get to the bottom of the school to prison pipeline in one panel discussion. We've got a lot of wonderful, pertinent data. I believe that we're still scratching the surface, right? There's many different layers and complexities of school and home and community and policies and laws, and that's going to be a body of work that's going to be present for you guys to address in your respective fields, right? It's psychology, it's education, it's legal, it's probation, it's history, it's school. We need everybody to come together. It takes a community to raise a child and to develop a mind. So did we give you guys a round of applause yet, or did you stop me? You stopped. Let's do it now. All right, so you guys hung out with us. We appreciate that. This is only one of many events to come, right? We are on Instagram as a CRC, Community Reentry Consortium. We will follow back. This is how we spread the word and keep you posted about upcoming events, workshops, community happenings, reentry programs, et cetera, right? So this time we're going to open up the floor for questions and answers, and there's a microphone in the middle. Or should we, now let me just ask you, because we're going to work this out together. Should we have someone bring the mic to you, or should we have you stand up and go to the mic? Let's get it. She wants you to get involved. She don't want you sitting there and just wanting somebody to bring some microphone to you. You guys bring that energy. Let's get busy. And then you're going to get up out of here and have some...
Everybody looks so beautiful in here. Give yourself a round of applause for looking so beautiful.
First question.
Good evening, panel. Good evening.
Good evening.
I have a question. It's sort of difficult, and I'm only going to choose one person for the answer. I don't know who yet. I'm going to look up. But it's a very difficult question, and I only want one answer. What is the one takeaway we, the audience, and I'm going to pick who, should take away from tonight's meeting? And I'm going to ask the Dean, Saunders, to answer that. The one takeaway that we should get from tonight's meeting.
It's a lot to digest. but I'm up for the challenge. The one takeaway is that community. A lot of what we need is community to be a community again. A lot of us live in what we call, quote unquote, hoods. Our young people have not experienced a neighborhood. They've experienced the vocabulary of a hood, which is something derogatory. But unfortunately, a lot of them didn't have the experience growing up where you go next door to your neighbor and get a cup of sugar. Or if grandma's in the window looking out for you and they can discipline you. So we need to really re-establish and reimagine what a neighborhood is. So my recommendation is, let's become communal with one another again. Let's communicate with each other again. Regardless of race or ethnicity and class, instruction, all these other labels that put on you, we're human beings. Human beings need love, care, affection, time, energy. So take away from this the fact that let's share some love, and also it's not just about love, it's about accountability. If people in your family are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, let's have some accountability. If people in your family come home from doing their incarceration and are raving how great it was, because some people do that and have a misconception to our young people that they had a great experience, check them. Let's hold people accountable, because we're scared to hold people accountable now.
Yeah, everybody's so sensitive about taking care of responsibilities. Thank you, Mr. Saunders. Next young man.
All right, good. I'm sorry. You panelists did a good job tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question for the courtroom. Miss Reyes, Miss Raya. What is your position in the courtroom?
I'm counsel for the Department of Probation.
Okay, so I want to know, like.
But I was a prosecutor, so I could answer from that position.
Oh, okay, all right. And I know you're a judge, right? All right, so I want to know on your behalf, like, if the judge finds someone guilty and you find someone not guilty, how does that work?
Well, the judge has the final rule, right? So if the judge finds somebody guilty, there's not really a lot that the other people in the courtroom can do. But I can tell you that as a prosecutor, right, I worked a lot of my career as a juvenile prosecutor, and I very strongly saw my job as sometimes not prosecuting. Right? So we had the power to say, I don't want to bring this case, right? There's not enough evidence to bring this case, or there's too much going on to bring this case. So I think that is a lot of where, if we found that somebody was not guilty, we wouldn't even bring the case in the first place, you know? And I think that is something that we could do as lawyers in the courtroom, find another way to handle the case so that it doesn't even get to the judge. So he doesn't have the ability to say guilty, because I'm saying, Judge, this case doesn't even deserve to be presented to you. So I think that's probably the best way that I would answer that question. Because sometimes if the judge says guilty, there's not that much that we can do. But sometimes, I always said when I was working as a juvenile prosecutor, that I wore a lot of hats, right? So my job was to present the case on behalf of the community and on behalf of the victim. But behind the scenes, I was always working in the best interest of the child, right? So even though I might be presenting the case and saying this person has to be held accountable, right? This person has to be held accountable for the actions that they took. That doesn't necessarily mean lock them up. Right? That means that my job is then to figure out, all right, we have to hold them accountable. What do we do next? Right? What does that look like? What can we put into place to get this person in a better position in the system than when we met them in the first place?
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. Okay. And I just have one more question. What is the age limit now? Because I remember before it was like 14.
That's such a complicated question because the law changed a few years ago, right? So 16 and 17-year-olds charged with lower level offenses, misdemeanors, they all go to family court. Okay. But if you're 16 or 17 and you're charged with a felony, Judge Camacho can speak to this very well, right? You go to a specialized part called the youth part. And then the good majority of those cases are ultimately transferred to family court, but certain serious violent felonies stay in the youth part. So it's a little bit complicated, but the answer is anyone under 18.
And this is going to be hard to believe, but until almost a few years ago, the age of criminal responsibility was 16 years old in New York State. And we used to get some 15-year-old jailers and 14-year-olds. So many of us got together, went to Albany, and now it's 18. But only several years ago, North Carolina and New York State were the only states in the country where you can send a 16-year-old to state prison as an adult.
I think the scarier part of that, Judge, is to raise the lower age, right? So until last year, you could be 7 and arrested as a juvenile delinquent in New York. So we don't see a lot of 7-year-olds in the juvenile justice system, but that's how the law read, right? At the age of 7, and when I go and talk to schools, I always say to kids, now don't call on your little brother because they stole your iPhone, right, and get them arrested. But at the age of 7, up until last year when they raised it to 12, kids could be arrested as juvenile delinquents.
Yeah, and what's more scarier than that, Judge, is at 16, I went upstate as an adult. I was scared to death.
Right, and that's what the law was.
I tell you, I went to grown man jail. I was waiting for them to give me 8 months in Nassau County. They sent me through downstate correctional facility. It was horrible.
We're sending 15-year-olds to state prison as
yeah,
jails.
something, but I persevered. So, next, all right, next up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. It was a very enlightening and lovely panel to be here to listen to. I'm a student here in the doctoral program in the Learning and Teaching Department, and I also teach in carceral spaces. I do higher education in prison. And so what I try to do as we talk about the school of prison pipeline is to change, since I'm at the end, right, to go from the prison to school pipeline, right, and talk with a lot of my students. And some of the things that I hear from them is some of the things you shared, right, as fourth graders, their teachers telling them that, you know, you're going to go to prison, you're not going to amount to anything, et cetera. So my question to you, and it, you know, it's like utopian, but how can, what can we do to disrupt, right, the school to prison pipeline when education is being attacked, right? Books are being censored. History is trying to be, people are trying to erase history and not allow us teachers to really bring, you know, history of slavery and history of racism, a history of how this country was built into the classrooms. So how can we as teachers, some of, you know, or my colleagues here or my peers here are, you know, aspiring teachers, like how do you suggest or do you propose that we can try to attack and disrupt the school and dismantle the school prison pipeline?
Have to adopt activism, you know, as and be change agents. I mean, this is, you know, important for teachers to feel empowered or to seize power, actually, because again, it's our job as teachers and as educators who have been formally prepared for our professions to make sure that school boards, states, federal government, and policies don't usurp our authority and our power to do our jobs and to reclaim our children. And you know, regardless of whether you have tenure or not, or whether you, you know, somehow don't understand, you know, all of the, you know, complexities, you know, of how everyone is connected, every entity and policies and laws and stuff are all, you know, connected. I think the bottom line, you went into education because of your love for children, I would hope. You went into education because you believed in the power of education to transform lives. So I think you have to be an advocate, you have to be an activist, and you have to be empowered to you know, reclaim those lives and, you know, not let them take our children. I mean, we can't outsource, you know, discipline, which is what these SROs and these armed police officers are doing. You know, this neoliberal educational reform agenda I spoke about before, you know, defund, if some people come about defund the police, defund that whole effort and, you know, bring those funds back so we can get counselors and social workers, you know, and other school administrators, you know, who are going to make sure that our children are doing well and come to school prepared to learn and they're well fed and that they're getting good nutrition and so forth. I think we need to change. We can look at some models internationally of what's going on, where the children are actually involved in growing gardens and planting food and that food being used to feed them. That they have time, instead of putting them in detention, make them go, and plant and tend and water the vegetables and the fruit that, we're trying to grow. I mean, so it's all kinds of ways that we need to think outside the box and don't let us, be restricted, in our understanding of the whole education and development process for young people.
Professor Lightfoot, could I add just a little bit to that? Can I add a little bit to that, please?
Yes, please.
So just think about it. If Trump ends up in solitary confinement, the chances of DeSantis winning is very high. And he's already talking about removing stuff from the school curriculum, right? So we have to understand the power of our vote as well and the influence of our vote and who we put into office. I felt so bad that I had to pick the best of two evils, so to say, when I had to vote for either Biden or Trump, right? I felt bad about it. And now we have, again, Trump may not be here, and his next up, who may win, is someone who doesn't take education seriously, especially for black and brown children, right? So it's very important that we understand. And as an educator, well, most educators, we should look at how to revitalize the school curriculums. I remember a few years ago, my nephew was talking about something like gamifying the school curriculum, because a kid will learn Fortnite before he will learn multiplication. And then we can somehow incorporate the two, we're going to have a bunch of geniuses around here. You know what I'm saying? So.
Well, Florida is.
I'm sorry,
too.
gentlemen. I don't mean to interject, but we got one more. We got a few people waiting, Mr. Lightfoot. I do apologize, sir. I'm sorry.
No problem.
But you could finish with Florida, and then she's gonna go. All right? Thank you.
Okay. Now I was just saying that the churches in Florida are saying if the teachers and the governor and everybody, the school board, doesn't want to teach black history and teach history honestly and correctly and accurately, that the churches are going to do it, and more power to them.
More power to them.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next young lady.
Good evening. Thank you all so much for your contribution. Thanks, Dr. Gervich, Mom, for bringing me here. Good segue. My question's sort of similar.
Mom? Because y'all look alike. Am I tripping here? I was wondering the whole time. I was looking at it. I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah. So I already work in some capacity in education, and I hope to continue doing that in between degrees. And I would like to become either an attorney of some sort or a social worker after it's time for that. But so piggybacking off of our last question, coming from a different socioeconomic background, wanting to work with certain populations, wanting to work with students of color, lower income students, students with disabilities, etc. I guess you answered a lot of questions as for thinking outside the box, all of you. Thank you. I guess what I'm thinking about is intervention. So I guess my question would go predominantly to Mr. Saunders and Dr. Griffith. How to intervene while acknowledging that I'm in a position where I don't know what's going on in the home. I don't know what socioeconomic or legal battles might be going on in the home. I don't know what. Basically, how do I acknowledge that my privilege plays a role in the fact that I could mess a student's life up if I call the wrong person, if I say, let's get this student some help, that might, in the system, the capitalistic system we're working in, where in this school-to-prison pipeline, where essentially students' help is the principal's office in so many districts, underfunded districts. It is these guidance counselors it is these forces that are kind of designed to fail students. So with the limited resources and the corrupt system that we're working with, I guess, how do we act both within the system that we're working in and also it's a hard question. We're not going to get to the bottom of it, but
Before Mr. Saunders answers that question, he was stepping down to go out for a second, but what he didn't know But what he didn't know was that we have something up here for him as well.
No, I'll be right back.
No, that's for you. You can't go nowhere. You just received an award from the National Action Network.
Thank you very much. So to answer your question before I make a quick exit, I'll be right back. Brene Brown says it best. Empathy, not sympathy. Sometimes when you're in a position of privilege, you are sympathetic towards the population which you serve because you don't understand. But what they really want you to do is say that, I see you. I see your condition. I see where you are. How can I help you? Not assume. Not use your implicit bias or privilege to make assumption based upon the lives of the population which you serve. What I recommend is when you go into these schools, no matter what school it is, learn about the community in which you serve. Spend some time. Don't just get on the parkway, drive to the school and go home. Drive through the neighborhood, get a sense. Go into, support the local businesses in that community so they could see your face. Making that connection, learning about that community is essential. And when the kids see you in the store, they say, oh, Mom, that's my teacher. Oh, Mom, that's... They see you making a connection that you're not just raping the community to come and get your money and go home. Because I see too much of that. Nobody want to volunteer their time. The union says this and the union says that. And, well, I'm leaving at 3 o'clock. No, if you show up to a football game or a basketball game and you're in the audience and you tell that child you're going to show up, when mommy and daddy don't show up, and they see you out there, it makes a connection. It's about connection, folks, no matter what level you're on. Political, court systems, we have to learn how to connect with the population. So that being said, utilize your privilege and your resources to guide our children in the right direction. You may have access to internships for our young people if you're on a high school level. Utilize your privilege to bring resources to the community in which you serve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Ujima. Thank you very much. Be right back.
Thank you. Next person. Thank you very much.
Hello. Informative panel tonight. Thank you. My question is, how, as an educator, do we help kids make a connection without overstepping boundaries? How do we get them from the situation they have at home? How do we understand and bring them from survival mode to enjoying life, to giving them opportunities and seeing that there's more than just what they grew up with, that there's more to life, there's opportunities?
So it's pretty similar to the other question or questions, right? And it goes back to what you have control over. You have control over your classroom. You have control over the way that you interact with students, the rapport and relationships that you build with students, right? And so there's a saying that really it takes one individual, at least one healthy relationship with a child to change trajectories, right? That's what you have control over. You have control over how you show up for those kids. So you can be intentional about how you do that. You don't necessarily have to be a complete problem solver, solving every issue. If you have knowledge, if you have good intentions, right, and you're intentional about how you're interacting with that particular child or children, what you're also, the community that you're creating in your classroom environment, how you're responding to perhaps behaviors that may be off-putting, not necessarily looking for the most extreme consequence and result, but really trying to build skills and showing up to understand, you can make a change and you can be effective with that.
To my other question, the school I went to in California, I'm not gonna lie, it was gang related. So there were Crips, there were Bloods and color codes that people identified as. How do you get the school system to, again, break that way of life to see that? How do you get the administration to care? Because it seemed that my school didn't. It was almost 3,000 kids in that school in total. So how do you, from being overwhelmed, how do you get them to actually be proactive?
It's a process, and Dr. Lightfoot mentioned advocacy, and that's using your voice. You can use your voice, right? You can affect change by using your voice. You can speak up about what you see and also provide potential solutions as well. And sometimes people just don't know what to do, so they continue doing more of the same, right? But if you have your personal experiences and also you have your opinions, you can use your voice to affect that change on different levels, including administration.
And also in addition to that, like already just right there when you called them Bloods and Crips, I call them peer groups, right? I call them families. And what I had both sides, Bloods and Crips, in my program, which we call Glocks to Socks, where we went from carrying Glocks to selling their own sock. So we made entrepreneurs out of peer groups, right? So when we speak about labels and objectifying them, once we identify them as a Blood and a Crip, automatically we judge them, right? Yes. And so how do you be creative? Because they're already there. They're already in the gang. We can't do nothing about that. So how about taking that label off them and making them a peer group and turning them to young entrepreneurs and now showing them some value now, right? So let's instead of devaluing them, let's extend their value, make them more valuable as humans and not dehumanize them and call them, the Bloods and the Crips.
Got it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for a good panel. My question is about, actually, let me put it this way. I am grateful for the opportunity to access this panel. There's so much information here. There's so much wisdom here. I am a third-level doctoral student. I'm in the clinical psychology PhD program. And what I have to say is that there's so much interconnection between access and the legal system, right? So when I was growing up in my elementary school, accommodations were given to me without me even lifting a finger. As I moved forward and I went through undergraduate, it was still provided for me, but I had to put in a little bit more work. As I'm in my doctoral program, I'm realizing that a lot of the onus of advocating for myself is put on me, and there's not many more supports when you get to that higher level of education. And it makes me think of what all of you were speaking about, the connection between able-bodiedness, but I would like to say, that there's also a concept of able-mindedness, where certain minds are locked out of accessing this kind of information. So, what I will say about this environment is that you all are able to access your information and share it freely. My question to you is, when you step out of here, out of this accepting environment, what are the things that you do when you go into a environment that is less understanding, less forgiving? What are some of the things that you do to provide yourselves with self-care, to fight this fight, because it's really important? And anybody that would like to answer can answer, because I think it's a worthwhile question.
So do I. That was wonderful.
Well, I'll tell you, it's very easy for me to just say what I think in a group like this that's very receptive, but it's very difficult when you talk to people who are not as receptive, who are closed-minded. So I think, and I keep going back to stories, right, Victoria? I think what I try to do is change hearts and change minds by telling stories that will compel people to care, will compel people to listen, will compel people to take action. The power of individual stories, like some of those that we heard today. If you go into a group like that that's not so receptive, I'll bring somebody like a person with a powerful story with me, and I'll tell my own powerful stories. And you sort of see it, sort of like, yeah, maybe that makes sense. Yeah, I guess. Oh, and then you actually see some emotion. So I just think telling individual stories of one person at a time changes hearts and changes minds and make people not be so mean.
Excuse me, brother. What's your name?
Richard.
Richard, first, thank you for your question. Every last one of my accomplishments that I have today is a result of my incarceration. I learned remorse in prison. I didn't love my children until I went to prison, so I learned love in prison. I learned the difference between regret and remorse in prison. And so I go into hostile environments. He said Marcel's running around at 3 o'clock in the morning. Guess who he's calling as well to run with him? We go into hostile environments, right? And one of the things I tell them is, and I'm clear with it, you don't got to be like me to be like me. Mm-hmm. You don't got to be abused. You don't got to be shot at 16. You don't got to be stabbed. I got stabbed in prison, and this brother can attest to it, in the middle of my chest with an ice pick. And it didn't penetrate me. It was nothing but God, right? So a lot of things is you don't have to be like me and go through what I went through to be why I am today. I wrote my book in prison. I got my education in prison. I learned empathy in prison. I learned all these things in prison. One kid I'm gonna tell you what a kid asked me. I go into schools in PS40. The kid said, Prince, he said, why do all the bad kids just get the attention? Like why? Like the bullies get the attention, the bad kids get the attention, but I'm not getting in trouble, and nobody helps me with anything. So the system is already designed for us to focus on all the bad kids, and we got the same other kids who are doing exceptionally well in the same neighborhood who gets no attention, no resources. We have no programs for the good kids. You see what I'm saying? None at all.
It sounds like you found freedom in prison as well.
I sure did. I sure did.